If you're an AQA A-Level Business student looking for a video to revise Unit 7, Analysing Strategic Position, well, this video is for you. Now, this is part 3 of 3 for Unit 7, so if you haven't already, make sure you go and watch those other 2 parts first. But we're going to go through some important concepts that you need to know for your exams, including what Porter's 5 forces is and our 3 investment appraisals. The payback period, average rate of return, and net present value. Let's get into it. The first topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video will be Porter's 5 forces. Now, Porter's 5 forces is one of the most important models that you will learn in your entire A-level business specification. Well, Porter's 5 forces is a business analysis framework to assess the competitive environment of an industry. Because Porter argued that competition with an industry can't be just understood by just looking at the size or the number of competitors. So he came up with these 5 forces. We have the bargaining power of suppliers, the bargaining power of buyers, we have the threat of substitutes, threat of new entrants, and the intensity of competitive rivalry. We will be going through every single one of these forces, seeing what they are and how it affects a business. But what Porter wanted to do with his model, he wanted to basically analyse, well, how attractive is an industry depending on how strong these forces are. And putting on my best Star Wars impression, the stronger the force, the lower the profitability the businesses will experience in that industry. Because what Porter argued that if any of these forces are strong, it has the potential to reduce your prices within that industry, or it would increase your unit costs. Therefore, that would be impacting profitability. And we can see here how this would reduce our profit margin. So as we said, if you are reducing your prices, your profit margin would reduce if your unit cost stays the same, or it becomes more expensive to operate in that market. So your unit cost increase, price may stay the same, and once again, profit margins are beginning to reduce. The first one of Porter's 5 forces that we'll take a look into will be the threat of new entrants. Now, the threat of new entrants simply measures how easy is it for new competitors to enter that market and disrupt those existing businesses. So when this force is high, it increases the level of competition. Now, those new businesses, you've got to think, well, how are they going to start taking customers away from these larger existing businesses? Well, they're going to try and be more innovative. They may try and be more competitive with their pricing. But these new entrants will be doing everything that they can to start gaining market share. Now, depending on whether the threat of new entrants is high or low, depends on the barriers to entry. Now, all the barrier to entry is something that is stopping or making it difficult for a company to enter that market. So for example, let's say one of these existing businesses has great access to economies of scale. So their unit cost is so low that these new businesses would never be able to compete because they would never be able to compete on these pricing fronts. Or we can think of the brand loyalty of those existing brands. Think about companies like Apple. Apple has one of the strongest brand loyal followers in the entire world. So these new phone companies aren't able just to enter the market and take those customers away from Apple. And we can look at how expensive it is to enter that market. So for example, to become an electrician, the barriers to entry aren't really that high because it's quite easy to enter. It doesn't cost a lot of money to be an electrician. But if you wanted to start manufacturing yacht engines, well, that's going to cost a pretty penny and it's not exactly easy to do. So the higher the capital requirement to enter that industry, obviously the stronger the barrier to entry would be. We could look at potentially any form of intellectual property, which we'll take a look at in a bit more detail in Unit 9. So how does the threat of new entrants impact our profitability? Well, as we've said, if the threat of new entrants is high, lots of new competitors are entering that market, there's more substitutes available, there's more choice available for your customers. Everyone starts to compete on this price front, so you as a business may need to lower your prices, which could reduce your profitability. Or we need to invest more as an existing business on promotion, on innovation, on product differentiation to make sure we stay standing out from those new entrants. But that would increase our costs, and unit costs could also increase, which once again could decrease our profit margins. The next one of Porter's 5 forces that we have is the threat of substitutes. Now, when we think of substitutes, sometimes students tell me, well, it's just their direct competitors. But that's not what the threat of substitutes is all about. It's actually those indirect competitors. It's those products and services that can still serve similar customer needs and wants of your product or service. So for example, when I look at the threat of substitutes for an airline business, well, it could be car rental companies, it could be transportation through buses, it could be transportation through trains or through ferries. Because when you think about it, they still serve the same customer needs. You can still get from one place to another and from one country to another. So with the threat of substitutes, these are not your obvious direct competitors, but you still have to be aware of them. And a great example of this is Blockbuster. Now, Blockbuster selling CDs and DVDs, they were just mainly concerning about, well, other companies selling CDs and DVDs. But they didn't care too much about this new substitute coming into the market, a company called Netflix. Because Netflix offered a substitute way for watching movies and TV programs. Now, the threat of substitutes turned out really high for Blockbuster because they're no longer a business anymore. So how does the threat of substitutes then impact a business's profitability? Well, once again, those threat of substitutes, they may be offering something which is more affordable to customers, a better alternative. And we know from price elasticity of demand, the higher the number of substitutes there are available to customers, the more price sensitive they are, the more price elastic they are. So typically, if we have a price elastic product, we want to lower our prices to increase demand by a greater amount. So what happens is we all reduce our prices, but once again, this can reduce our profitability. And not only that, well, if your threat of substitutes are offering a better alternative to yours, you need to really focus on investing in your product or service, making that better than these substitutes. Once again, investing into marketing research, investing into research and development can be expensive. Or you may try to offer more brand loyalty programs, but all of this can cost the business more money, increasing our unit cost and decreasing our profit margins. Next up, we have of our 5 forces is the bargaining power of buyers. Also, your bargaining power of customers. Now, your bargaining power of buyers is the influence customers have over prices and businesses' decisions based on demand and options. Because when we think about it, customers, they want the highest quality product at the lowest possible price. So essentially, when the bargaining power of buyers is high, customers are able to negotiate lower prices. Now, in terms of whether the bargaining power would be high or low, depends on the number of substitutes available. Because if one business tells me, well, our prices are really high, I'm just going to say, cool, we've got lots of substitutes available for us, so I'm just going to go down the road and buy from them instead. Or if you're selling a product that is fairly standardized, once again, if it is standardized, most likely it has a lot of substitutes and alternatives available. It also depends on the switching cost, because if that switching cost is high and it's really difficult to stop buying your product and go to an alternative, well, then potentially my bargaining power is going to be low as a buyer. Another important one is how big are the orders that customer places with you. Now, if that customer places a large order and actually accounts for around 60% of my entire business's revenue, well, I want to make sure that I keep this customer, because if I don't, well, I lose 60% of my entire business. So their bargaining power may be extremely high. So how does this all begin to impact my business's profitability? Well, once again, if the bargaining power of buyers is high, that means that they're able to negotiate these lower prices, which could reduce my price and reduce my profitability. But not only that, let's say if we did have a high bargaining power of buyers, well, from my business's perspective, I want to do what I can to try and lower them. So I want to try and invest into product development, research and development, looking at new innovative solutions, differentiated products, which could obviously be very expensive. I also want to focus on retaining my loyal customers, so offering them loyalty programs, potentially looking at promotional campaigns. This can be expensive, increasing our unit costs. Next up, out of our Porter's 5 forces we have is the bargaining power of suppliers. Now, what is this all about? Well, your bargaining power of suppliers is the control suppliers have over pricing, quality, and availability of key resources. So realistically, with your suppliers, they want to be paid the most amount of money to maximize their profits, so to increase their prices. Now, some factors that may influence the bargaining power of suppliers, well, first of all, it depends on how many alternative suppliers there are within the market. Because if there's not many suppliers, because, for example, they may supply a real key resource and not anyone else really does this, well, they know that they have a high bargaining power because you can't go anywhere else in order to get those supplies. So the bargaining power of suppliers could be really high. Or if my business has high switching costs to stop going to these suppliers and going somewhere else, once again meaning that I'm pretty much locked into this contract, well, once again the bargaining power of suppliers once again could be a bit higher. But a way for a business to try and reduce the bargaining power of suppliers is they can look at vertical integration. And when I talk about vertical integration, I mean backwards vertical integration, which we'll take a look at in a bit more detail in Unit 9. But essentially all this means is we could look at merging or taking over that supplier. So if the bargaining power of suppliers is too high, just buy the business, just take over the business. So how does then the bargaining power of suppliers impact my business's profitability? Well, if the bargaining power of buyers is really strong and it's really high, well, of course, they're going to want higher prices. So from my business's perspective, my cost would go up and therefore that could increase my unit cost and decrease my profit margins. And the final one of our Porter's 5 forces that we'll take a look into is the intensity of competitive rivalry. Now, this is the level of competition amongst those existing businesses in that industry, your direct competitors. And of course, we know this is going to affect your pricing and your profitability. Because lots of competitors out there may be trying to compete on a price front, so could be engaging within a bit of a price war. So when there is lots of alternatives out there, maybe the market is really saturated, the intensity of competitive rivalry will begin to be high. And as well, if product differentiation is also fairly low, so everyone's selling fairly similar products or services, once again, this would increase the intensity of competitive rivalry. Now, a business can look at reducing this in several different ways, potentially looking at gaining a competitive advantage, giving a shout out to those Porter's generic strategies, looking through the source of differentiation. We could also look at building our customer loyalty, so we aren't afraid of our customers going to our rivals. Or if you can't beat them, join them. Look at mergers, look at takeovers, look at these joint ventures with other companies in your industry. Now, just some examples of industries with high intensity of competitive rivalry. You could look at the supermarket retailer industry with companies like Asda, Audi, Lidl, Sainsbury's, Tesco, Morrison's. All of them now are going into a bit of a price war. We could look at airlines with EasyJet, Wizz Air, Ryanair, British Air, Jet2. We could also look at the clothing industry with Zara, ASOS, Boohoo, Primark and H&M. So the one we need to answer now is, well, how does the intensity of competitive rivalry impact a business's profitability? Well, as we said earlier, if this force is really high, there's a lot of competition in the market, not really that much differentiation, well, potentially we're competing on more of a price front. So the issue with this is that if our prices decrease too much, this can of course reduce our profit margins, or what a business may decide to do is they may decide to increase their marketing spend, so focusing more on promotion and advertisement. Or they may look at developing brand new products, trying to differentiate themselves in order to reduce the intensity of competitive rivalry. Now, all of this could potentially increase our unit costs and decrease our profit margins. The next topic that we're going to take a look at in this revision video is the dreaded investment appraisals. I know students don't like this, but do not worry. We're going to break down each of these individually, go through a step-by-step process of how to calculate them, along with the advantages and the disadvantages of using each investment appraisal tool. The first one of our 3 investment appraisals that we'll take a look into will be the payback period. Now, all the payback period wants to tell us is how long is it until the business recoups that initial investment that they've invested into a certain project. That is it. How long is it until we recoup that initial investment? So let's have a look about how we calculate this. Now, on the screen here, they may give you the data like this. So they may give you your cash inflows and your cash outflows. Now, what's important to know is that we start off in year 0. The reason why we start off in year 0 is because this represents the initial investment. And all my first step is to calculate the net cash flow. So really simple, you do your cash inflows minus your cash outflows, stuff that we learned in Unit 5. Or what they may decide to do is they may decide to give you the data like this. So they give you the years, the net cash flow already calculated, and then they want you to calculate the cumulative cash flow. Now, the way we calculate the cumulative cash flow is that we just add the years together. So, starting off with year 0, we just take that negative £450,000. Remember, if a number's in brackets, it's a negative, just move it to the right. But then for year 1, the way we do the cumulative cash flow for this year is that we do negative 450,000 plus the net cash flow of the following year, £50,000, to give me a cumulative cash flow of minus £400,000. we do the same thing again for year 2. Minus £400,000 plus £85,000 equals negative £315,000. We do the same again for year 3. Minus 315 plus 130 gives me minus £185,000. And we do the same thing again. We do minus £185,000 plus £150,000 equals minus £35,000. And watch this one closely. Then we do the same thing again, but we go from minus £35,000 plus £225,000 to positive £190,000. Now this is really important because remember, the payback period just wants to find, well, how long is it until I recoup that initial investment? Now you will recoup that initial investment when that cumulative cash flow hits 0. That's when you are going to have your payback period. Now, they've been mean here. They've not given me it as an exact year. Most likely what your examiners will do the same as well. But we know it's somewhere in between year 4 and year 5. It's somewhere in between there. So it's 4 years and something months. But how on earth do we calculate the something months? Well, really, really simply. All we need to do is we need to take, well, how much is it in our cumulative cash flow until we hit 0, divide that by the net cash flow of that following year, and of course times by 12 because that's how many months there are within a year. So in terms of how much cumulative cash flow we need until we hit 0, well, it's just £35,000. And the net cash flow of the following year is £225,000. So all I do, I divide those two numbers together. £35,000 divided by £225,000 times by 12 gives me 1.86 months. So my payback period is 4 years and 1.86 months. Now the payback period I think is a really good tool, especially if you are trying to prioritize those quick returns. Maybe there's a lot of uncertainty in the future, maybe you're operating in the technology industry. And it's an easy tool to try and compare against different projects. You know, let's say I've got 2 projects in front of me. Project A, payback period 2 years. Project B, payback period of 4 years. Well, we're going to go for the payback period with the smaller period of payback. So we're going to go for Project A. However, I think the biggest problem is with this payback period is that it just looks at how long is it until you get your money back. It doesn't look at what happens after. It doesn't tell me the story, well, what happens after the payback period? How much money do we get after that? How profitable is this venture? Is it really good? Is it really bad? And not only that, it doesn't factor in the time value of money. Keep that in mind for when we look at our net present value. The second of our investment appraisals we have is the average rate of return. Now, the average rate of return. This calculates the average annual return of an investment as a percentage of the initial cost. Now, that may not make too much sense at this moment in time, but essentially it's like the profitability. It is expressed as a percentage as well. Keep that in mind for later on. Now, this is how you calculate it. I know there's loads of things going on, but do not worry, it's not as complex as you think. Because if you look at the top part of that formula, you know, overall profit divided by number of years. But that's just the average profit per year. Oh, that's quite simple to calculate. And then what we do with that value is that we divide it by the initial investment times 100. So all you're doing the average profit per year, divide by the initial investment and times 100 to get that percentage. Let's do a step by step. Now, I would prefer you guys to do the cumulative returns. Now, yes, you can just put all of those net returns into your calculator all at once. But I can guarantee in your exam, you're messing up somewhere. You're going to put in one too many zeros or one too little zeros. So take it slow. Do not get this wrong because you try to rush it. So let's do the cumulative returns. So remember, we just did that with the payback period. Year 0 will be minus 600,000. Well, year 1 minus 600,000 plus 85,000 equals minus 515,000. We do it again for year 2. Minus 515 plus 125 gives me negative 390,000. We do the same thing again. Minus 390,000 plus 150,000 gives me minus 240,000. We do the same thing again. We do minus 240,000 plus 190,000 gives me negative 50,000. And finally, for the very last year, minus 50,000 plus 275,000 gives me a cumulative return after 5 years of £225,000. Now, what's important to know, we are including every single year. So this project has a lifespan of 5 years. So where the payback period would just want you to stop as soon as the number goes positive, with the average rate of return, you need to calculate the profit of the entire project. Keep that in mind. But remember that next step. Well, how much profit has this project made? Well, it's made £225,000 because that's our cumulative return at the very end. Well, the next step was just to calculate the average profit per year. So take that £225,000 divided by the number of years. So 225,000 divided by 5 gives me an average annual profit of £45,000. And then all we do with this value is divided by the initial investment. So 45,000 divided by 600,000 times 100 gives me an average rate of return of 7.5%. Now, even though the initial investment is a minus figure, just ignore the minus, you should get a positive for this. Unless, of course, the project doesn't make a profit. Now, looking at that 7.5%, it doesn't necessarily tell me a lot. But what's good about the average rate of return is that if I had two projects against each other, I would invest in the project with the higher average rate of return. And if I'm only looking at a single project, well, what I would do is I would compare this percentage against the interest rates. Because let's say the average rate of return of a project is 1%, but interest rates are 3%. So why would I go and spend all this money on newer projects when I can just invest my money into a savings account? Because remember, your interest rates are the reward for saving. So the average rate of return investment appraisal tool is very good. It measures the profitability of the entire project. Not like payback period where it doesn't tell you the entire story, average rate of return does. And it's quite useful therefore for your long-term investment planning. However, the problem with the average rate of return is that we are assuming consistent profits throughout the project. Now, let me come back to this slide in just a moment. But if you look at the average rate of return for this project here, well, it's assuming that I'm getting a 7.5% average profit per year. But if we look at this, I don't make profit until after 4 years and something months. So we know within that time though, there's a lot of uncertainty. The economy could go down, we may be in recessions. And it can be quite subjective of what a successful average rate of return number could be. You know, some businesses may be really happy with 12%. Other businesses may be really satisfied with 7%. And if I'm a startup company, I don't really have this data to say, well, is this going to be successful or not? Just a quick one. If you need a bit of support with how to improve your exam technique, such as how you improve your chains of analysis, how you improve your application with your answers, and also how you improve your evaluation, well, I've created a free exam technique course that goes through all of this, including the different answer structures for your 9 markers, 12 markers, 16, 20, 24, and those dreaded 25 markers. And you can access this by clicking the link in the description. Back to the video. And the final one of our free investment appraisals, probably the most important out of all of them, is our net present value. It can also be called the discounted cash flow. Now, the problem with the other two investment appraisals, the payback period and the average rate of return, is that it doesn't count for the time value of money, which essentially means that over time, money loses its value. Because if you think, well, what could £20,000 buy me today in terms of a house? Well, you're lucky if it's even a deposit. But if you turn back the clocks 100 years ago, £20,000 could probably have easily brought you a house or two. Why? Why is that? Well, the reason is inflation. We know about inflation that over time, it loses the purchasing power of money. Money becomes less valuable. Now, what the great thing about the net present value does is that it tries to estimate those future cash flows in terms of today's value of money. And it does this by discounting them. Now, for me personally, I think the net present value is the easiest one to calculate out of all of them. Now, you can see here a project, an investment that we have, 5 years, initial investment minus £600,000, and we've got these discounted factors. Now, as we said, these discounted factors help us understand in today's terms, in today's world, how much is that net cash flow worth? So what we want to do is we want to calculate the present value. Really simply, all we need to do times the net cash flow by the discount factor. So for the first year, for year 0, should I say, minus 600,000 times by 1 because it's in today's world, so I'm investing that today. So in today's world, it's still going to be worth the exact same amount. So it's minus 600,000. After 1 year, our net cash flow is 85,000. Well, if we times that by 0.92, we get a present value of 78,200. When we look at year 2, we do the net cash flow of £125,000 times by 0.84 gives me a present value of 105,000. So what we are saying, that year 2 net cash flow of us gaining £125,000, well, in today's world, what we are saying, that is only going to be worth £105,000. Because remember, inflation makes the value of money decrease. So £105,000 today is worth £125,000 in 2 years' time. And we just do the same thing. 150,000 times by 0.77 gives me the present value of 115,500. We do again for year 4, 190,000 times by 0.71 gives me a present value of 134,900. And finally for year 5, 275,000 times by 0.65 equals 178,750. So just to reiterate my point, in year 5, we're recording a net cash flow of £275,000. But in today's world, that is only worth £178,750. Now remember, it's called the net present value. So all you need to do is you need to cast over a net over all of those values and add them together. So we add that entire column together to get my net present value of £12,350. Now, the criteria that we have, if this value is positive, we want to go ahead with the project. If it is negative, we ignore the project. And if you have 2 projects against each other, you want to go with the project that has the higher net present value. Now, I think net present value out of all 3 is the most credible because it factors in the time value of money. Because even though your payback period may be 4 years, well, realistically, if we factor in the time value of money, it would be a lot longer than that. The issue that we have, well, I've given you the discount factor and your examiners would give you the discount factor, but it's your job to actually question it. Well, how valid is that discount factor? Because what if inflation is higher? What if inflation is a lot lower? We don't know this. So I think the biggest issue with the net present value is the uncertainty, is the unreliability of that discount factor, because it can be quite subject and very difficult to calculate. The very last thing that we need to do now in this revision video is look at the different factors that may influence our investment decisions. And there are 3 of them. It could be our investment criteria, it could be non-financial factors, and the level of risk and uncertainty involved. Starting off with our investment criteria. Now, when we look at the investment criteria that a business may have, well, it's essentially why are they investing in this project? Do they have a specific goal in mind? So they may look at a project that exceeds the interest rate, so having an average rate of return that is higher than interest rates. Or they may want to achieve a specific target profit level. So they may have the investment criteria of having a high net present value, for example. So they only invest in certain projects if the net present value is higher than £100,000. Or they may decide to say, well, we only invest in a project that has a payback period of under 2 years. We'll also have different non-financial factors. Now, these will play a crucial role in our investment decisions, as business must consider more than just profitability. They may consider a strong brand image, particularly in terms of these ethics and social responsibilities that businesses have. So if we invest in a project that could improve our brand image, well, this improves our reputation, meaning that we have more loyal customers. It could also be around our business objectives, so we want to make sure that the investment aligns with the long-term goals of the business, maybe around business growth, sustainability, innovation, whatever it might be. And finally, we also must consider our competitor actions, because this will heavily influence our investment strategies. As businesses, we may need to respond to market trends, technological advancements, or industry shifts to remain competitive. And of course, the last thing that we would need to consider when investing into a certain project or making an investment decision is a level of risk and uncertainty. Now, you have to appreciate all of these investment appraisal tools are predicting, are forecasting what they think the net cash flow or the net return would be. Now, there's a risk involved. There's uncertainty involved. We don't know how accurate this would be. The further you go into the future, the more uncertainty there is. So the longer the investment is, the more unpredictability there is. And that's why the payback period is such a good tool to use. If you found this video useful and want to continue your revision for your A-Level business exams, I highly recommend you check out our video here on Unit 8, Strategic Direction, because in this video we're going to go through some of the most important theories and models that you need to know for your exams, including Ansof's matrix and Porter's generic strategies. I really do hope these videos have been helping you all out with your revision. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.